guys. Welcome back to another episode of Personal Trainers Who Care. I'm here today with Dr. Ben. So he's a cardiologist from the Cardiac Longevity Clinic. He is the founder and the CEO. I wanted to talk to him about heart health today, heart disease. We know that it's a huge issue in North America, worldwide. And I wanted to specifically dive into a little more after about how men's mental health generally and mental health has a big impact on heart disease and the development of heart disease. We will get into that down the line, but I do want Ben to introduce himself for a bit and talk about his background, how he came to the Cardiac Longevity Clinic, and how he started his career.
Thanks for having me. This is
Very
exciting.
exciting.
Yeah,
Big
I'm
clap.
happy to be here. Yes. So thanks for the intro. I'm a cardiologist. I did my training, my medical school here in the University of Ottawa. And then I went to Toronto to do my internal medicine residency training. And then I came back to Ottawa for my fellowship in cardiology and then cardiac ultrasound. And yeah, the whole idea of longevity clinic started, and I think we had an offline chat about this. It all started from basically the fact that the way we do healthcare and do medicine is really not focused on what I like to call kind of a proactive personalized medicine. We're very reactive, and we are very cookie cutter in the way we deliver healthcare. And that has always been very frustrating to me in my own practice, because my patients basically come to me when they're at that end stage disease. They've already had this bad lifestyle. They've already had all of their issues, these risk factors building up, accumulating, causing heart disease. And they come to me at that very last piece of the journey when it's already too late to prevent disease. And a lot of times I would fix them up with medications or procedures or surgeries, and then I send them out. But because they continue to have the wrong lifestyle, the wrong habits, they end up back on my door again a few years later. So basically the way we practice medicine is mostly Band-Aid solutions, and it's very reactive, and it's also very cookie cutter. We provide the same solutions to everybody, regardless of their genetics, regardless of the side effect profile they have to the medications and surgeries, because everybody's very different fundamentally. But we don't address that at all in the way we practice medicine. So the whole idea of starting this cardiac longevity clinic was to be proactive, to start actually addressing these lifestyle issues that can cause metabolic disease and cause heart disease way before, decades before they happen, but also personalized, really kind of tailor it to your body composition, your genetics. What can we do to come up with a personalized plan for you to try and prevent heart disease?
Yep. So true. It's funny that you even say that, because I'm pretty sure that was one of the key points that I talked about with Sarah, our holistic nutritionist, not the holistic nutritionist that we had on the last episode, just about how these things are developing decades before they actually happen. And you need someone who's going to, nip it in the bud and find the lifestyle habits that are going to lead to the development of disease, right? And the warning signals that your body is giving you, because they happen very early. And just how holistic of an approach you need. You need to look at so many different factors in someone's life before you, can make significant strides towards health, because it is so multifaceted. But you mentioned that you felt like you were seeing a lot of reactive medicine. Is that sort of what sparked you starting the longevity clinic yourself? Was this something that was a dream right after medical school, or did you spend some time in family medicine or doing an alternate practice before you decided to start the longevity clinic?
So it's actually really interesting where I ended up now, because when I started my practice, I was all about the really, really sick patients. So I was actually quite split between ICU and cardiology. So I was thinking about doing ICU, and I was actually doing quite a bit of critical care medicine at the beginning when I just graduated. So working in the intensive care unit with patients who are essentially on their deathbed sometimes, being on mechanical ventilation on breathing machines, basically being on multiple IVs, invasive measures to try and keep them alive. And I really enjoyed that aspect of medicine. But that actually is the part where it sparked a lot of my interest in longevity, because you realize when you're at that stage how people are essentially the ones who have a very healthy body to begin with, and they end up there. They ended up doing so much dramatically better in the critical care compared to the ones who were metabolically unhealthy. So the ones who were overweight, didn't have muscle mass, had comorbidities like diabetes and high blood pressure before they ended up in the critical care, they ended up doing so much worse than healthier people who had better muscle mass. They were not as overweight. They came off of the breathing machine so much easier. They came off of all the invasive measures so much easier. So that's actually when it kind of started. Because, sometimes when we are young, we don't even realize, right? Like I see this all the time. If somebody is necessarily like in their 20s and 30s, sometimes they don't exercise because they don't feel like they need to exercise, right? Because they can't kind of look ahead 10, 20, 30 years from now and understanding how big of an impact even that little daily habit of half an hour a day would make.
Yeah.
But I was seeing that at the kind of the back end with working in the critical care. So that kind of started it all. But I also have a personal passion about it. I'm a personal practitioner with myself. So everything I'm kind of talk to my clients in longevity clinic about are things that I practice in my own personal life and I experiment with. So, and I've kind of seen the results, because residence is a pretty unhealthy lifestyle. We don't sleep well, we don't eat well, we don't have time to exercise. So once I finished my residency, through reading and trying to actually practice a lot of these lifestyle factors in my own life, I realized how much better I feel, how much better I perform. So that even sparked it even more that, okay, there's something here that I need to really, preach and teach other people about. So that was really the other spark to start the longevity clinic, was kind of a combination of those factors.
Yeah, no, it's so true that I feel like so many people don't realize how poorly they feel until they start to change something, and they're like, oh my God, wait, this is what you're supposed to feel like. Makes a huge difference. But so you would say that the heart of what you do is to make sure that you're giving people the skills, or at least an awareness of the preventative aspects of longevity. What does that entail in terms of how you approach a client who comes into your clinic, or a patient who comes into your clinic? What are the pillars that you're looking at?
Yeah, so we really divide it into kind of three general areas. So one is kind of cardiovascular health, the second is metabolic health, and then the third is kind of lifestyle assessment / optimization. So with the cardiovascular health, that's our wheelhouse, right? So we do a full cardiovascular workup on the clients to first make sure they don't have any existing underlying cardiac condition to begin with. So a lot of people come to me because they've had a loved one dying of a heart attack or a stroke, and they're really concerned, do I have disease? Do I need to be worried about, in the short to intermediate term, about risk of heart attack or stroke? So that's kind of the first reason they're afraid and they come to me. So that's the first thing we do.
So it's a genetic thing in their family, and they're like, okay, I just want to make sure that this isn't necessarily happening to me. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Or sometimes it's just like they've seen a friend or a colleague, dropping dead, dropping dead on a hockey rink or something like that. And they're like, it was completely unexpected. This guy was in his 40s or his 50s, was healthy from the outside, and he just died suddenly. And I just want to make sure that doesn't happen to me. So that's the first pillar, is we just make sure they're safe and they're healthy at the time. And then we kind of do a metabolic workup, which is kind of the proactive medicine piece. So we look at their metabolic status by a combination of a body composition, a DEXA scan, to look at their muscle mass, look at their visceral fat. And then we combine that with the blood work that we do in the clinic to get a pretty good comprehensive look at their metabolic health. And essentially what I mean by metabolic health is how their body's metabolizing energy. Are they insulin sensitive? How the intake of food is affecting their body essentially. That's essentially your metabolic health. So we get a pretty good picture of that with the DEXA scan and their blood work. And then the third pillar of the program is the lifestyle piece. So we partnered with Freeform Fitness. So we have athletic coaches and personal trainers through Freeform Fitness to do a full comprehensive fitness assessment on them. We have the dietitian to kind of look at their nutrition. Is it optimized for longevity and cardiovascular health or not? We do a home sleep study on them to look at the quality of their sleep, and also for all sort of sleep disordered breathing that they could have, to see if there's anything we can optimize there. And then we do also a mental health assessment screening on them to see if they have things like anxiety, depression, how well they're coping with stress. And if that is an issue, if they score high, then we connect them with a network of our psychologists and counselors to kind of help them with that mental health aspect. So those are kind of the three main pillars: cardiovascular health, metabolic health, and the lifestyle
There
piece.
you go. You said something that struck a chord with me. When you're looking at people who are healthy on the outside, or at least they appear healthy, and it keeps happening. I hear it all the time, like this person dropped dead, or I had a heart attack, or this happened, and they look perfectly fine. I know it's on an individual basis and every case is different, but are there any trends that you're seeing among those people? What is happening with those people? What might be predisposing them to that? What is causing that?
Yeah, so I would say there's probably a couple of categories. So one is people who have family history, right? So if heart disease and stroke is prevalent in your family, you need to seek care, because it's possible that you have a genetic condition that's predisposing you to having a early premature heart attack or stroke. And those are the things that we can check with blood work and with imaging to look for. There are some very common genetic factors, actually fairly common, mostly affecting actually your cholesterol levels. That's probably by far the biggest genetic factor that's very kind of prevalent that can cause early heart attack. So we check that in the clinic. So if you have that family history, I think that's the first category. Is you need to get checked, because you could be the healthiest person, working out, having a good body composition. If your cholesterol, if your LDL cholesterol, which is kind of the bad cholesterol, as we like to call it, is super high because of genetic factors, regardless of how good your lifestyle is, how clean your lifestyle is, you're going to have plaque in your arteries, and you will have an early heart attack without medication, without medical therapy. So unfortunately, in a good proportion of these clients, they need medication. They need pharmaceutical help to bring down that LDL cholesterol, because people don't realize, but most of your cholesterol is actually produced in your body. It's only about 10% of it that comes from your diet. So even the most dramatic lifestyle changes, you're not going to be able to drop your LDL cholesterol more than a certain amount. So if you have those genetic conditions, you're going to need pharmaceutical therapy to actually block synthesis of cholesterol in your liver. So that's probably the first category. But the second category by far is lifestyle stuff, right? So these are people who on the outside, they're people that we call skinny fat, for example, right?
There you go.
So there are people that look fine from the outside, but because of their lifestyle habits, whether it's a combination of sedentary lifestyle, what they're eating, how well they're sleeping, how much stress they have, they could have chronically elevated cortisol levels that is exposing them to having what we call visceral fat, which is the fat around your organs that you can't see from the outside. So they might look skinny and fit from the outside, but they have tons of visceral fat in the inside. And that is the metabolically active fat. That's the type of fat that actually causes insulin resistance and eventually leads to prediabetes and diabetes. And that itself basically increases inflammation in your body that then leads to plaque formation and heart attack and stroke. So I would say those two categories are by far probably the biggest hidden risks that people don't realize. Just because they feel fine and they look fine from the outside, they think they are fine. But I think paying attention to those, and there's simple blood work. DEXA scan and blood work is fairly simple to do, and it gives you a pretty good idea about your metabolic and genetic status and whether you're at risk of developing heart attack and stroke.
Right. Yeah. And I've done some reading on metabolic health in general, and it's scary how common it is now. And like you were saying, like people who look fine from the outside, or they're skinny fat, There's something like, I read something the other day about something like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 people have fatty liver disease now, and they don't know, or the onset of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. A lot of people are not concerned about it because they're like, oh, I don't really drink. But it is a risk factor for it is a component of metabolic dysfunction, right? How does that tie into the topic of insulin resistance and then also heart disease? Like, what does that mean for people who don't know what non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is, and the onset of visceral fat and everything that you were talking about?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So the first of all, the prevalence of metabolic disease is just staggering. So Canadian data is not as widely available, but in US, over 100 million people have metabolic disease. Just think about that number, right?
Population is
It's
what,
like staggering.
300 million or something?
Yeah, like 300 million. Yeah,
One
so
in
it's
three people.
crazy. Yeah. So that's wild,
Yeah.
right? And out of those 100, I think it's somewhere like 105 million is the exact number. And then out of that, something like 30 million of them actually are not overweight, which is pretty crazy. So it kind of shows you there are all these other factors that are not necessarily kind of manifesting themselves. So non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is definitely a part of metabolic dysfunction, definitely a part of kind of that kind of the categories of what we define as metabolic syndrome. The non-alcoholic fatty liver disease definitely fits in there. And it is one of the probably the biggest risk factors for then developing complications like cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
So you could be overweight or pre-diabetic, but if you don't have the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, your risk is actually a lot lower. Once you develop non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, that's almost an independent risk factor to develop all sort of bad stuff, including cardiovascular events, heart attack and stroke, but then also liver failure. So you can actually get to a point where that fatty liver turns into cirrhosis, which is kind of the next stage of kind of developing liver dysfunction, and ultimately leads into scarring. So fibrosis, which is kind of the end stage liver disease where it is irreversible. The good news is if you can catch it early enough before you actually develop cirrhosis, it's almost fully reversible.
Yeah.
So, and then it's directly linked to insulin resistance. So the reason that I actually developed non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, the pathways are pretty much hand in hand. Like almost every single person that has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease has insulin resistance. And insulin resistance then, directly affects how it almost becomes like a vicious cycle. Because when you don't respond to insulin, then your blood sugars go up, but they don't come down. So you start remaining elevated, and then elevated blood sugars leads to prediabetes and diabetes and all sort of issues as a result of that. So it becomes kind of a vicious cycle if you don't address
which
it.
is also a stressful experience for the body, which keeps the blood sugar high. And, excess stress causes muscle wasting, and then you feel weak, so you stop exercising because you feel weak, and that just feeds into the cycle, and it's never ending, right? And then people think like, oh, I'm too sick, I'm too unfit, I'm too people start to identify with their illness and think that they themselves are broken and unwell, and it's not necessarily a pattern that they can reverse or turn off or
100%.
But to go back to the insulin resistance thing, I think is so important, because that sort of, it keeps coming up as almost a root cause or a something that starts a cascade of events. What do you point to for people who are struggling with insulin resistance?
So it is essentially a manifestation of metabolic, how their body is essentially metabolizing energy, right? So the way we address it is in kind of the four pillars that we talk about. So number one, probably the most important thing I would say is exercise and fitness. By far, probably the biggest factor. So, and that's for multiple reasons. So number one, as you're exercising, obviously you're utilizing blood sugar, right? So post-exercise, we have pretty good evidence of this. Post-exercise, your blood sugars massively drop, regardless of how much insulin resistance you have. Post-exercise, it drops. And one of the reasons that happens is because you actually have glucose channels in your muscles that are completely independent of
Yes.
insulin. So I actually have patients who are type 1 diabetics, meaning they don't have any insulin in their own body. They have to inject insulin because their body cannot produce insulin. And some of them can completely regulate their glucose almost with no exogenous insulin, meaning no injection of insulin from the outside. They're able to regulate their blood sugar just by exercise, just by walking.
Yes.
So they eat well and then they go for a walk and they're able to control the blood sugars without actually having to take extra insulin. Usually they take small amount of basal insulin. But when you don't actually produce any insulin, you also need short-acting insulin on a regular basis every time you eat because your body is not producing those spikes of insulin that it normally does because your pancreas is just not working. So just by going for a walk or exercising, they're able to bring their blood sugar down despite the fact that they have no insulin in their body. So that's one of the beauties of exercise for insulin resistant and elevated blood sugar that's one of the main reasons. But the other reason is the visceral fat directly contributes to your cells becoming resistant to insulin in the first place. So what happens with exercise, usually you're able to increase what we call calorie bank. So you kind of go essentially into a calorie deficit much easier. So you're able to lose that visceral fat a lot better. So you can almost reverse that vicious cycle that we talked about, right? You can break that vicious cycle. So as you lose weight, you lose that visceral fat, you're building muscle mass, then you're able to improve that insulin sensitivity, and then everything kind of gets better. So I would say the first thing for people who have insulin resistance is really exercise and building muscle mass. By far, that's probably the most effective strategy. The second, which is the close second, is of course your nutrition, right? And for every condition when you talk about exercise, you have to talk about nutrition, right? Like they go so hand in hand. Without proper nutrition, you're not going to be able to effectively exercise and vice versa.
And not necessarily build muscle or see the results of all the hard work that you're doing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And you see this all the time, I'm sure, where people are in the other end of the spectrum where they're so restrictive with their calories and with their proteins and carbs, and they're like lifting a lot. They're actually overworking out. Like they actually spend so much time in the gym, but they're not able to build muscle mass because they're doing too much cardio and not eating enough carbs.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the other end of that spectrum. So important to kind of basically pair those two things together, your exercise regimen, your nutrition regimen. So insulin resistant is very much about that. So if you can exercise effectively and then have the right diet, then you're much more likely to be able to get rid of that insulin resistance and kind of regain your insulin sensitivity effectively. And that's why our nutritionist and our fitness specialists work so closely together. My nutritionist actually herself is also a fitness instructor. So I don't know if you know her or not, but Deborah Sloan is her name.
No, I don't. But it's such a common path, right? Because you work with people all the time who are like, I want to build muscle, but then they have all these other problems that they might need help with, especially if they're having, nutrient deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies that are contributing to their ability or lack thereof to absorb their nutrients and to actually fuel their body beyond just, macros. Like not everything is going to be plain chicken, rice, and, broccoli or whatever, even though broccoli is great. Exactly. Rice is great, chicken's great, but bodybuilders can be nutrient deficient too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, does every person who comes into the clinic end up working with your entire team? You feel like, I'm guessing that, if someone's coming in, they need help on all these different fronts. So you would send them in some capacity to them.
Yeah, like we highly recommend it because I initially started the program actually, it was just going to be cardiovascular and metabolic. Initially, it was just going to be cardiovascular health. Then I'm like, well, without the metabolic piece, you won't be able to really help these clients nearly as much. So we added kind of the metabolic piece. And then when we started talking about lifestyle, initially, I was only going to focus actually on just the nutrition piece. But then I kind of realized the more I read about it and the more I thought about it and the more I kind of saw it in my practice that, like if somebody's just addressing their nutrition, but their sleep is crap and they're not exercising, you're not going to be able to get rid of their metabolic issues, right? So that's why when somebody comes in, they really need to tackle all these issues at the same time to be able to, they almost have synergistic effect, right?
Yeah.
So like if you're not sleeping well, you're going to be eating crap and you won't be able to lift weights.
Yes.
If you're eating bad, doesn't matter how well you exercise, you're not going to be able to see the
Yeah.
gains, right? And the same thing happens with your mental health. If you're stressed out and your cortisol levels are through the roof, you're definitely not sleeping well. You're probably not eating well, and you're probably not going to be able to
Yes.
exercise. So all four of those pillars are so interconnected that we really need to tackle them all at the same time and optimize them all at the
Yeah.
same time to be able to see the effect.
Um, I want to talk about sleep a little bit more. We know that, not sleeping well elevates your cortisol levels, makes you more tired, obviously, the next day, makes your mental health worse. You feel like crap. You don't want to do anything. How does it affect the foods that you reach for, your energy levels in general? Why is that so important? And what are the risk factors when it comes to sleep?
Yeah. So, yeah, as you pointed out, sleep is so crucial because, again, it's connected to all of these things. So, number one, what happens is your sleep is your recovery time, right? So, when we look at people's sleep architecture, we kind of analyze their sleep efficiency, first of all, which is affected by stress and mental health, amongst many other things, including their nutrition, etc. And what happens is your sleep efficiency is out of your bedtime when you're in bed, how much of it your sleep, right? Very simple concept. We can measure that with a sleep study. For most people, if you can kind of push that up to about 90% plus, that would be ideal. Hard to get there, getting into the 80s is probably the minimum we aim for. Then we look at the REM and deep sleep because that's when so REM is kind of where your emotional recovery happens. So your memory consolidation, emotional recovery, cognitive recovery, so being able to focus, your attention, your concentration, all that stuff, that is things that get consolidated during your REM sleep. So we look at REM, how much REM are they getting? Are they getting enough REM or not? How can we optimize that? And then we look at their deep sleep. Deep is where your physical recovery happens. So if you worked out, your muscles are sore, next morning you wake up and you feel good and the muscles are not sore anymore, all of that muscle recovery primarily happened during your deep sleep. So you need to get enough deep sleep to get that muscle recovery. That's when your blood pressure drops, your heart rate drops, your growth hormones goes through the roof, your cortisol drops. So all the good physiological things that are important for recovery happens during the deep sleep. So that's why the sleep is so important, because you have all these different stages in your sleep and each one of them is addressing recovery in a certain part of your body, whether it's your emotional health or your physical health. And you obviously have to be in bed enough time. So that's a challenge for a lot of people, right? Like I first look at their sleep duration. If they're not in bed enough, obviously they're not going to get enough deep or REM. And then after that, then we kind of work with them to kind of optimize how much REM and deep they're getting through our sleep specialist. We kind of focus on a sleep hygiene strategy for them. But it's incredible. Like I see this all the time for stress management as well too. Like if somebody's having a ton of stress, there's nothing like optimizing their sleep to fight their stress and their mental health issues.
100%.
And as you pointed out, the cortisol, as I said, it kind of basically dips down. So again, if somebody's struggling with this stress, that dipping of cortisol that happens, that is one of the things that is going to allow them to be able to then make better choices the next day.
Yes.
They're not going to hold on to the visceral fat. So we know that the visceral fat is directly related or correlated with chronically elevated cortisol levels. So again, getting a good sleep drops those cortisol levels. You're much more likely to be able to get rid of your visceral fat. Yeah, I had this client. It was actually crazy. This guy was working out 1 hour a day, super intensively. Like he would go to like interval training classes, like the most intense stuff. He was going to CrossFit. And he just could not get rid of visceral fat. And he actually had insulin resistance. It was so odd to see because he was eating so well. He was exercising so hard. But on his DEXA scan, he had a ton of visceral fat. He has good muscle mass because he was working out, but his muscle mass was also actually not that impressive for how much he was working out. And basically, what we looked at, his cortisol levels in the morning were through the roof. And then we looked at his sleep study, like awful. Like his sleep efficiency, I think, was in the low 70s. and he was just not in bed enough. More importantly, he was only getting like about 5.5 hours of sleep a night. So literally the only thing we did with this guy, we didn't have to optimize anything because his nutrition, his exercise, everything was so tuned up. The only thing we actually told him was to actually exercise less and sleep more.
Yes.
And you can't believe it, within a month, he actually lost about seven
Yeah, there you
pounds,
go. Yeah.
right? Like by just sleeping more,
Yeah.
exercising less, so
Yeah,
counterintuitive.
but
But
less is more. And people, especially now these days, people have such an obsession with going hard. There's a lot on social media with, hybrid training, and you're a hybrid athlete, you're a big lifter, and then also now everyone's getting into running. So all the run clubs, and not to say that that's bad, that's amazing. But there is such, like, stress addiction is rampant in gym culture and in our culture in general. And there's never enough, you're never doing enough, there's always more to do, there's always someone who you can be doing better than. And there's this competitive mindset, and people think more is better with exercise. I think also just because there is a lot of wellness discourse out there, and everyone's like, oh, movement is medicine, and it is. But people are so obsessed, they're pushing themselves to the brink, especially with the high intensity interval training, going so hard. They're obsessed with getting a sweat on, or with showing how hard they're working, right? And if you leave your exercise session exhausted, that means that you did it well. When really sometimes less is more. And recovering is so important. You're only going to improve insofar as you are recovering from what you are doing.
mhm, mhm,
But it's amazing, and it's such a testament to how important it is to manage stress.
mhm.
And exercise, it can definitely add to your stress bucket. On the other end, it sort of pokes a hole in the bottom, so it's draining out stress just as much as it's adding to it. But if you are going hard, hard, hard every single day, over an hour, and then not sleeping, like, you're only doing yourself a disservice. So, part of health is learning when to scale things back.
Yeah, and I think you made a very good point, and I think that's kind of the differentiation between chronic stress versus interval
Yes.
stress, right? So exercise is like a pulse of
Mm-hmm.
stress. So a pulse of stress is actually very good for you as long as you're recovering from that.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you have good recovery rest period between your intervals of stress, then it's great for you. It's the same way in your life, right? Like if you get yourself challenged by a new project that is challenging your brain, challenging your different skill set, like that's really good for
Mm-hmm.
you, right? Because you feel like you're growing, you feel like you're learning, and you are going to get better and more experience. But once that becomes a chronic issue where you're constantly trying to grind, day and night, that's when it turns into burnout. So it's the same with
Yeah.
exercising, right? So chronic stress where you're like working out, working out, working out, not sleeping, not recovering, and that has super adverse effect on you. Whereas if you do it in pulses and then you have proper recovery in between, that's where you see the
Mm-hmm.
gains.
Yeah. So true. Um, I want to, let's sort of along the same vein, but what do you think the fitness and wellness industry gets wrong about heart health and health generally?
Yeah, so I mean, social media has changed everything,
Mm.
right? So I think one of the challenges is, people go on social media or TikTok and there's, all TikTok or Instagram. They're all sort of, crazy reels on all sort of stuff that are not based on science at
Right.
all. So I think when we talk about like fitness industry, it's very important to differentiate like what sector of fitness industry we're talking about. Is this a guy sitting in his basement, kind of like trying to become a YouTube influencer by doing things that are just going to get a lot of
Yeah.
views? Or is this someone who actually has the education and the experience and trying to inform people rather than just getting a million views,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a challenge, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult to kind of go out there and kind of figure out what is the credible source of this information, right? Um, I think the thing that most people get wrong, and I'm not sure if it's necessarily the fitness industry or the clients of the fitness industry, is people think they need to do something super sexy and fancy to be healthy,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Like they think they need to kind of find that newest exercise regimen, and and that's a fad, right? Like it changes every season, every year. There's something new. It was, for a while it was
Yeah.
CrossFit, and now there's something else. But when you actually look at them, the important thing is really to look at the principles. And like a perfect example is zone 2
Mm-hmm.
training. Like zone 2 training is not sexy. Like zone 2 training is just going for a walk where you get your heart rate up to about 70 to 80% of your max heart rate, and you just maintain that for 30
Yes.
minutes. You're not doing it in a crazy gym. It's not a spinning class in this crazy spinning
Yes.
studio. I'm not saying any of that stuff is
It's
bad.
fine.
It's fine, but it's not like getting healthy. You don't need to spend like thousands of dollars and going to a very expensive gym or a very expensive
Yes.
studio to see those
Yeah. Yeah.
results, right? The most important thing is actually consistency. Whatever you do, if you can do it day after day or week after week, have a regular fitness
Mm-hmm.
program that is addressing all different aspects of your fitness. And I would say it's actually quite geeky. It's nothing super sexy about it, I mean, you have to do some degree, and most of it people know for a long time, you have to do some cardio,
Yeah.
you have to do some strength training of some
Mm-hmm.
kind, and you need to do some sort of an interval training, man. And your interval training can be a part of your strength training where you're kind of spiking your heart rate up and
Yeah.
down. But you don't really need fancy equipment or a fancy gym to do any of that. And as long as you do a combination of those factors on a week to week
Yeah.
consistent basis, you're probably going to do really, really
Yeah.
well. You're going to do better than like 95, probably 99% of
Right.
people just by
It's so
that,
true.
you know?
Consistency. And the one thing that you said about zone 2 training is so funny because um sort of going back to the whole like going hard all the time thing. People don't realize how chill your zone 2 training
Mm-hmm.
probably is. Like
Mm-hmm.
um even people doing the talk test. The talk test is actually you should be able to sustain that activity while breathing through your nose, not through your
Mm-hmm.
mouth. So slow down because you
Exactly.
need to really just relax. People have no idea how much extra stress they're adding to their body when you are just going so hard all the time. Again, sort of less is more. Obviously,
Yeah.
move, but less is more in a lot of ways. And the whole, wellness. There's such a like wellness inflation these days. Like
I like that. Wellness inflation.
everyone's trying to get after it, and then the goalpost gets getting moved further and further away. And I mean, we are
Yeah.
dealing with different things these days than we ever have.
Mm-hmm.
There's more toxins that we're being exposed to, microplastics, you name it. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously, we're gonna have to introduce new tools to deal with that, and I think that's what the wellness industry is trying to do in a lot of ways, trying to share information about how to deal with these new threats. But at the end of the day, like, hug your loved ones, go for a walk, lift some weights, eat all of your nutrients, get to sleep, get off your phone, like basic stuff. Get some sunlight in the morning, like such basic stuff. Free stuff. Free stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Does not at all. Um, you kind of mentioned that you are someone who you practice what you preach.
Mm-hmm.
What's a wellness practice, mindset, or habit that you personally swear by?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think probably the thing that has been the biggest game changer for me has been like optimizing my
Hmm.
sleep. Yeah, especially as a physician, as a cardiologist, going through the training that I did for the last 7 years, 8 years really, 8 or actually almost 9 years of my training, I was not sleeping super well because I was doing a lot of night shifts. During the last 7 years of it, I was doing night shifts almost every fourth or fifth night. I would be up all night, right? So
Completely dysregulates everything, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Completely dysregulates your circadian rhythm. It takes you, you basically can never, because it takes you another couple of days to just kind of get back into your normal rhythm. And by the time you do, the next call is going to come up. So I was almost in this chronic fatigue, states. And I think a lot of people can connect with that. Like new parents, for example,
Yeah.
right? Like my friends who are new parents is, they're just constantly exhausted, but that becomes like their new
Yeah.
norm, and they don't even realize how much higher they could perform if they were just getting an extra hour of like good quality sleep. So once I finished my training, I kind of started to kind of read a little bit more about sleep and try and optimize a little bit better. But it was really, the turning point was probably around, I would say, during the time of pandemic. Actually, was when I really got to the weeds of how I can really improve my sleep. And like game
What does
changer,
that mean for you
like game
specifically?
changer.
What's your sleep hygiene like? What are you doing before bed? How do you wind down?
So number one is I learned to like just be in bed longer. Like I'm one of those people, because most people need somewhere probably between, it's a fairly large range
Yeah.
actually. It's somewhere between kind of 6 to 9 hours of sleep that people need. But I mean that's a pretty big range. Um, I'm I need about 8 hours, and I was getting usually less than that. So a big part of it was just making the time to be in bed for at least 8 hours.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the first step. The second step was to make sure that I have, and that was actually probably even bigger than being in bed for 8 hours, was to have a good bedtime routine. So now I kind of basically an hour before sleep, my phone has this alarm that goes off. As soon as it goes off, within 15 minutes of that, I put my phone away. I turn off the TV, turn off computer. All the electronics are off. I dim all the lights. And then I pick up either my Kindle or like a physical book.
Yeah.
And I sit on a specific spot on my couch that has a view of my beautiful backyard, which usually is lit because I kind of live outside of the city. So like my backyard is always lit. Like there's always like this sky.
Yeah.
Like there's so much nature light actually even at night.
Beautiful.
So I'm kind of like sitting almost under the sky. And I'm reading. I'm reading usually for half an hour, 45 minutes. And it's incredible. It's like your body actually gets into this habitual trigger that as soon as I'm in that environment and reading that book, I gradually get sleepy within
Pavlov
half an
yourself.
hour. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like I'm ready. I go to bed and I like pass out within 5 minutes. It's
There you
beautiful.
go. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you speak to the electronics thing a little bit more and the reason why you choose the Kindle or an actual book compared to reading on your phone or reading on anything else? 'Cause I feel like
Yeah.
people kind of know about this, but they don't really know.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that's a great question. Yeah. So the problem is the blue light, right? So basically, you have this cells, these on your retina, which is kind of the layer in the back of your eye, and these cells respond in different ways to different spectrums of light. So your body, the way it responds to kind of a red spectrum of light is very different than blue spectrum of light. So blue spectrum of light, evolutionarily, your eye is used to seeing that in the morning because that is the spectrum of light that your eye perceives when the sun is rising. So back in a time where there was no electronics, we would only see that blue spectrum light during the day. You would never see that blue spectrum light at night. But now that we have these artificial lights, particularly our screens with the electronics, we're getting a ton of that blue screen light in a time where you're not supposed to see it, and your body and your eyes and your retina of your eye is for thousands of years is used to seeing that only during the day. So you're almost tricking your body in thinking that it's sunrise by staring into your phone or your computer. And that is why then you won't be able to sleep, because all of a sudden your entire circadian rhythm almost resets because your body thinks it's all of a sudden morning. So once that happens, and people don't realize, once that happens, not only you're not sleeping right away, but your entire night's sleep is going to have a poor quality. So even if you go to bed and you fall asleep right away, that is not the problem. The problem is your brainstem is now turned on. So the entire night, it cannot turn off.
Your nervous
so you
system is
will
completely
never
dysregulated. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not going to be able to go deep in REM. Like particularly your deep sleep is really, really going to be disrupted as a result of that. So your sleep efficiency drops, but also your deep sleep really, really drops because your body thinks it's
Yeah.
morning. And you're like, why am I in
Yeah.
bed? Like I should be up and around. Yeah, so staying off the electronics is huge, huge. And to the same notion, almost the regularity is also very, very important. So now I've become really religious about my bedtime and my wake up
Mhm.
time. So 5 days a week, I really keep that bedtime and wake up time around plus minus 15
There you go.
minutes. Because once it goes beyond that, if you're yo-yoing with what time you're going to bed and what time you're waking up, your circadian rhythm is never able to kind of fully regulate
Yeah.
itself to be able to go into deep
Yeah.
sleep. So being very kind of religious about this is my bedtime and this is my wake up time and try and keep that. You can disrupt it for one night a week, but ideally not more than one
Yeah.
night a week. So I kind of reserve it just for Saturday night. And then every other night I try and stick to that kind of like 10
Yeah.
to 6. Like for me, it's kind of 10 to 6. I kind of stick to that 10 p.m. to 6
Yeah.
a.m. sleep schedule because that really, really also helps your circadian rhythm to kind of regulate and make sure that you get good quality sleep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And something back to the blue light. I read something months ago. Not sure how accurate my retelling of this is going to be, so bear with me. But it's basically a study that looked at insulin sensitivity while
Mm-hmm.
looking at blue light, and just looking at blue light while you're eating, so, scrolling, eating um, on your phone can decrease your insulin sensitivity. So it actually
Oh, interesting.
can contribute to insulin resistance. And you know what's funny, actually? I was just talking to one of my coworkers today. He gave up social media for starting a couple days ago, and he tracks his stats with I don't know, I think his watch, Garmin or something. His resting heart rate is down since giving up social media, and his
Wow.
heart rate variability is up, which is.
Wow.
Can you explain that for people? Like, what is heart rate variability?
Yeah, so HRV is essentially how much variation you have in your heart rate from beat to beat, but it's really a measure of your nervous system
Yeah,
regulation, right? So it basically shows you have the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. We don't have to go into details of it, but essentially is how well regulated your nervous
yeah,
system is basically a good measure
yeah.
of
How
that.
how how well are you able to regulate your stress levels? How well do you bounce between your ability to rest and digest and your ability to activate or fight or flight go on, right? So
Hmm.
just goes to show that, looking at your phone and blue light exposure is doing much more than just, making it a little bit, turning your eyes on a little bit more and making you a little bit more resistant to sleep. It's causing a cascade of effects, all of which are relevant for heart disease and heart health. Well, that was a great conversation. I actually have to finish it there, but um, how do people find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so our website is
Mm-hmm.
cardiaclongevityclinic.com. So they can go on there and we have a very short form they can fill out and we get in touch with them, or they can email us at contact@cardiaclongevityclinic.com. That's our email. I can't remember our phone number, but it's also on the website. So yeah, phone, email, or the website, quick form, fill out with their name and their email and phone number, and we'll get in touch with them.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming out today. This is
Thank you
amazing.
for having
I
me.
am so excited for this one to be released. Thank you guys for listening. This is great. Tune in for the next one.